The morning my daughter drove out to tell me I'd be moving into a care home for my own good, she brought a brochure, a folder of forms, and a pen already clicked open. She set them on my kitchen table like a woman laying down a winning hand. What she didn't bring, what she never once thought to check, in all the years I spent drafting these exact documents for a living, was the one fact that turned her whole afternoon into a waste of gas. The house she was standing in didn't belong to me anymore. I'd given it away 12 years earlier, on purpose, to someone she could not touch. Everyone who hears this story asks me the same thing, usually before I've even finished. Why did I let it get that far? Why did a woman who saw the knife coming let it get so close to her ribs? Sit with me a few minutes, and I'll show you. Because patience, when you understand how paper works, is not weakness. It's a trap with the lid propped open. They mistook my patience for weakness. That was always the plan. Welcome to Where Grace Remains, where quiet women tell the stories the world stopped listening to. Before we begin, tell me in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is there right now. I read every single one. And if you've ever been underestimated by the very people who should have known you best, stay with me. This one is for you. Let me take you back to the beginning. My name is Josephine Marchetti. Most people call me Jo. I'm 69, and for 35 years I was a paralegal at a small estate planning firm in this town, which is a fancy way of saying I spent my whole working life watching families come apart over money and property, one signature at a time. I drafted the trusts. I witnessed the wills. I sat in the room while grown children discovered, too late, that mother had seen them more clearly than they'd ever seen themselves. So when I tell you I know how these stories usually go, understand that I don't mean from the outside. I mean I held the pen for other people's versions of this for 3.5 decades. I know exactly which document stops a grasping relative cold, and exactly which comforting sentence at a dinner table is really the first turn of a screw. I have heard it just makes sense and it's easier for everyone and we only want what's best for you in more conference rooms than I can count, and I learned young what those phrases are actually asking you to hand over. I want to tell you about Sal, because everything in me that stayed standing through this, I owe to Sal. My husband was a bricklayer. 44 years we were married, and he died 18 months before the afternoon of the brochure. Not a man of speeches, my Sal. A man of hands. He laid the brick wall around our back garden himself, every course of it, level and true, and he built the fireplace in the front room stone by stone, and our grandson learned to walk holding on to the hearth Sal made. That wall and that hearth are the closest thing to a love letter my husband ever wrote me. You could underestimate Sal at a glance, quiet man, dusty boots, and men did. And it cost them because Sal saw everything and said little and forgot nothing. I married a man who taught me there is no armor in the world like being underestimated on purpose. Here is the thing I did 12 years ago, the thing that makes this whole story what it is. And I did it long before I had any reason to think I'd need it. I put our house into an irrevocable trust. I need you to understand why, because it isn't paranoia and it isn't cruelty. It's the opposite. Years back at the firm, I watched a family due to a client of ours, a widow named Ruth, 78. Sharp as a tack, exactly what would later be tried on me. Her son moved in, moved her things, moved her doctor, and finally moved a judge to declare her incapable. And they sold the house she'd raised him in while she sat in a facility, insisting she was fine, which she was. I filed the paperwork on the other side of that. I watched it happen through the glass, and I went home to Sal that night and I said, I am never going to be Ruth, whatever it costs. So Sal and I sat down with Renata Vance, the attorney I'd worked beside for 30 years and trusted more than most of my blood, and we locked it down. The house went into an irrevocable trust. I kept a life estate, which is a plain way of saying I have the legal right to live in this house, my house, until the day I die, and no one on this earth can put me out of it. The trust owns the bricks. Renata is the trustee, and the remainder, the house itself, when I'm gone, passes not to my daughter, but into a separate, locked trust for my grandson. It cannot be sold out from under me. It cannot be borrowed against. It cannot be signed away, because I no longer own it to sign. It cannot be reached by anyone claiming I've lost my marbles, because you cannot force the sale of a house the confused old lady doesn't even own. I built the whole thing 12 years ago to be unterrible. You cannot steal what was never left unlocked. I told almost no one. Not because I was hiding it, but because you don't hand your enemy the map before you know they're your enemy. And for a long time, I had no enemy. I had a daughter I loved, and a son-in-law I tolerated, and a grandson who was the whole son. Let me be fair to Dana, because the part of this that still aches is her, not Brett. Dana is my daughter, and I know the girl. She was funny, stubborn, generous to a fault when we had nothing. She married Brett 15 years ago, and Brett is one of those men who is always 8 weeks from the deal that changes everything. There was the landscaping company, there was the app, and then 3 years ago, the house flipping business, where Brett borrowed real money from people who are not in the business of patience, a man named Keller and the quiet, well-dressed people behind him, and bought 2 properties at the top of the market that he could not sell at the bottom of it. When the business went down, the debt did not go down with it. Debt like that doesn't dissolve. It just goes looking for the nearest thing that isn't nailed down. They didn't tell me any of that, of course. What they told me 18 months ago, right after I buried Sal, was that they were between places and I was rattling around a 4-bedroom house alone. And wouldn't it just make sense for them to move in for a little while to help me, Mom, in this hard time? And here is where my story stops, sounding like the others. Because I did not simply say yes and let the tide come in. I said yes with conditions, and I put the conditions in writing. I sat the 2 of them down at that same kitchen table, and I slid across a single typed page because 35 years of watching goodwill dissolve into resentment taught me that the kindest thing you can do for family is make the terms clear while everyone still likes each other. Rent, I wrote, equal to their share of the taxes, the insurance, and the utilities. Itemized, monthly. They buy their own groceries. They have no access to my accounts. None. Not for emergencies. Not ever. The furniture stays where it is. The kitchen stays as it is. And my bedroom, the room where Sal held my hand at the end, is not part of the arrangement and never will be. I asked them to read it, and I asked them to sign it, and I kept the copy. Dana looked at me like I'd slapped her. Mom, we're family. You're really making us sign something? I'm a paralegal, sweetheart, I said. I make everyone sign something. That's how family stays family. Brett signed with a little laugh, the laugh of a man who signs things he doesn't intend to honor. Dana signed last, pressing hard enough to tear the paper a little. I noticed everything. I married a man who taught me how. Now I know some of you. I know that a fair number of you are already leaning at your screen thinking, Joe, you had them dead to rights. You had a life estate and a signed agreement. Why not just tell them to go the second they got out of line? My own sister Pearl said exactly that, more than once in exactly those words. Tell me honestly in the comments, would you have thrown them out at the first sign? Or would you have waited the way I waited? Hold that thought, because I'm going to tell you precisely why I let it run, and I don't think you'll disagree once I do. It started small, the way it always starts. It shifts so slowly you'd forgive yourself for missing it, except I never miss it. First, it was Sal's reading chair, moved to the garage because it didn't fit the flow. Then the framed photographs down the hallway, mine and Sal's whole life, taken down and stored safely for a repaint that never came. Then my good pans went up into a cabinet I need a step stool to reach, and Dana's set, the one she liked, came down to where mine had been. Little by little, the kitchen where I'd cooked 40 years of Sunday dinners stopped answering to me. I'd reach for the coffee, and it had moved. I'd go to sit in my spot by the window, and there'd be one of Brett's jackets thrown across it. Every single one of those was a breach of the page they signed. I knew it. I wrote them down. Not to nurse the hurt, I'm too old to collect grievances like stamps, but because a woman who spent her life in estate law knows the difference between a feeling and a record, and knows which one a situation like this is eventually going to need. Because here is why I waited, and this is the whole answer to the question my sister kept shouting and some of you are thinking. Throwing them out at the first moved chair would have solved the chair. It would not have shown my daughter what she was becoming. It would not have surfaced whatever it was they were so plainly, quietly frightened of underneath all the redecorating. And it would not have protected my grandson from the next thing and the thing after that, because people who are drowning don't stop reaching just because you slap one hand away. They come back for the other. I didn't want to win the chair. I wanted the whole thing in the light. Once, permanently, so I never had to fight it twice. So I let them believe I was exactly what they decided I was, a soft, grieving, fading old woman who'd go along to keep the peace. I let them get comfortable. Comfortable people get honest. They got honest through the heating vent. Our house is old, and Sal never did fix the way sound travels from the kitchen up into my bedroom through the ductwork. He always said we'd never manage a surprise party in this house, and he was right. One night, maybe 4 months ago, I was lying in the dark, not sleeping. You don't sleep much. That first year without them, and their voices came up through the floor, low and easy, the way people talk when they're certain no one who matters can hear. She won't sign it if we just ask, Brett was saying. We need to make it make sense to her. Frame it as estate planning, avoiding probate. She loves that stuff. She'll eat it up. And if she won't? That was Dana, and something in her voice was already tired, already gone somewhere I didn't want her to be. Then we go the other way. A pause. We start writing it down. She forgets things. She gets confused. We get her in front of the right doctor. We get it on paper. And then it's not us taking her house, it's us taking care of Mom. Nobody argues with taking care of Mom. Another pause, quieter, and this is the part that turned the hurt into a map. We just need it done before Keller's people run out of patience. If the house was ours, we refinance, we pull what we owe, and nobody ever has to know how close it got. I lay very still, and I understood the whole shape of it at once. The way you see the bottom of a pond when the wind finally dies. They were not entitled children playing at grown-up problems. They were two terrified people who had looked at a paid-off house and a widow they decided was harmless and seen a life raft. And every part of their plan, the estate planning pitch, the doctor, the whispered decline, rested on one assumption they had never once thought to verify: that the house was mine to take. It wasn't. It hadn't been for 12 years, and my daughter, through a heating vent, thinking I was asleep, had just told me exactly how much she was counting on something that was never ever true. I didn't cry. I thought I might if this day ever came. Instead, something went very still and very clear in me. The feeling I get right before I do a thing I've already decided is right. And I'll tell you what I felt underneath the clarity, because it's the truest thing in this whole story. I felt sorry for her, not for what she was doing to me. I was armored against that before she was born, for what she was doing to herself. My girl had become a person who could say those words in my kitchen. That was the real theft, and no trust in the world could lock it away from her. I slept like a stone that night. People always find that hard to believe. But when you know exactly where every piece stands, the board stops being frightening. The next morning, I called Renata. Renata Vance is 74 now, retired, meaner, and smarter than any 3 lawyers half her age. and she has been my friend for 30 years, which in my experience is a deeper bond than a good many marriages. She's not blood. She's the family I chose. I told her everything over the phone, plain and unhurried. The vent, the doctor plan, the Keller people, the signed agreement, they'd been shredding by the day. Renata didn't gasp, and she didn't tell me I must be mistaken. She said, "Put the coffee on, I'm 40 minutes out." And she drove over, a retired woman on a Tuesday morning, and sat at my kitchen table where all of it had started, and said the words I needed more than any legal strategy. They have no idea who they're dealing with, do they? All right, let's make sure they find out cleanly. That's what showing up sounds like. It doesn't make a speech, it just gets in the car. We spent that morning doing what I'd spent my whole career doing for other people. We pulled the trust documents and confirmed what I already knew: the house untouchable, the life estate ironclad, the remainder locked for my grandson. We refreshed the whole estate, so not $1 of mine sat anywhere a conservator could reach. And then Renata slid a card across the table, a geriatric specialist 2 towns over, and said the thing that made me laugh for the first time in weeks. "You and I both know you're the sharpest person in any room you walk into. Now let's get it in writing so that when they trot out their friendly doctor, you can hand a judge one page that ends the conversation before it starts." I took the evaluation 3 days later. 2 hours of it. Memory, judgment, the clock they make you draw, numbers backward, the whole merciless battery. It came back exactly as I knew it would. Cognition intact across every domain. No impairment. Signed, sealed, dated. I have never been so pleased to be told I'm in my right mind, and so heartbroken about why I needed the proof. And here is the part I did next that had nothing to do with protecting myself, because there was an innocent in all of this. My grandson, Sam. He's 8. He has Sal's exact way of going quiet and serious when he's working something out. And he learned to walk on the hearth his grandfather built, and none of what his parents were doing was his fault, and none of it was going to be allowed to cost him. His future was already the remainder of the house trust. But I did more. Renata and I built a second locked trust, funded from my own savings, for Sam's schooling and his start in the world, administered independently, untouchable money his parents could not spend, could not borrow against, could not hand to anyone named Keller. Sam's, and only Sam's. Sal built a garden wall meant to outlast him by a century. A man who lays brick like that is building for grandchildren he'll never meet. I was only finishing his work. Then the campaign started, right on schedule, and it came exactly the way I'd watched it come for other families 100 times. Not loud. Careful. Dana began asking, in front of others, whether I was sleeping all right, whether I seemed a little foggy lately. Brett mentioned to my sister, just concerned that I'd left the stove on again, a thing I have never once done. A cousin I hadn't heard from in years called Delicate to ask if I'd been checked out by anyone. I recognized every note of it. It wasn't worry. It was a record being built vulnerable, forgetful, declining the exhibits stacked up neat and early so that when the real move came, half the family would already believe the verdict. I'd witnessed that exact paper trail destroy a woman once from the wrong side of the glass. I knew the only thing that beats it. Not tears, not shouting, not a fight that makes you look precisely as unstable as they're claiming. Clean paper. A calm voice, and perfect timing. If you've ever quietly built your whole life so that no one could take it from you, a trust, an LLC, a will in a drawer, a door that locks tell me below, the women in these very comments have taught me something over the years. We are far more of us than they think, and we are not nearly as harmless as they hope. Say it. You're not the only one. I let it run 3 more weeks. I let them believe the doctor was coming. The papers were nearly ready. The fog was setting in on schedule. I let them get all the way comfortable. And then I set the table. I invited them to Sunday dinner, and I made Sal's mother's brochure because some weapons are kindness. And I sent Sam out to play in the garden by the wall his great-grandfather built. Renata came early and sat quiet at the end of the table. Pearl came too, my sister, who'd finally stopped telling me to throw them out and started trusting me to do this my way. We ate first, I insisted. You don't do a hard thing on an empty stomach, and I wanted no one able to say afterward they'd been ambushed. Then I cleared the plates, and I set a plain accordion folder on the table, and I laid my hand flat on it. Before anyone brings up doctors or estate planning again, I said, and I know it's coming because the walls in this house are thin and always have been. I'd like to show you all something in the light, on paper. And then you can decide for yourselves who at this table actually needs looking after. Dana went still, Brett's jaw set. I opened the folder and laid the documents down one at a time, unhurried. The way I'd laid out 1,000 of them across a firm's conference table for people who thought they held all the cards. This, I said, setting down the first, is an irrevocable trust executed 12 years ago. It owns this house, not me. I gave the house away over a decade before your father died, Dana, back when you and I were still close, and I'd never have dreamed I'd need it against you. I hold a life estate, which means I live here until I die, and no one, no bank, no judge, no doctor, no daughter can put me out of it or sell it over my head. There is nothing here to sign into your name, because it isn't mine to sign. There is nothing here to inherit, because when I'm gone, this house doesn't come to you. I set down the next page. It goes to Sam. It's been Sam's for 12 years. He just doesn't know it yet. Dana's head came up. I let her sit in it. This, I went on, is the agreement the two of you signed the day you moved in. Rent, groceries, no access to my accounts, the furniture and kitchen left as they are, my bedroom off the table. Every line of it has been broken, and I've kept a dated record of each breach, because I spent 35 years learning the difference between a hurt feeling and a documented one. I laid down the next. This is a full cognitive evaluation, dated last week, signed by a board-certified physician. Intact. No impairment. I bring it because certain people have been busy on the telephone telling this family I'm losing my mind. I looked at my daughter and I did it gently, because I meant it gently. I'm in my right mind, Dana. I'm afraid that's been the whole problem for you all along. The silence in that room had a weight to it now. I set down the last folder and rested 2 fingers on it, and this is a separate trust, funded and locked for Sam. His schooling, his start, his parents cannot spend it, borrow against it, or settle $1 of anyone's debt with it. Not 1 cent will ever reach Mr. Keller, in case that was going to be the next thing anybody thought to ask me for. Brett went white. He hadn't known I knew the name. Now he knew I knew all of it. And Dana did the thing frightened people do. She reached, fast as a reflex, for the version where she was the wronged one. You've been setting us up, she said, her voice climbing. You let us move in. You let us think you let Sam get attached to this house. And the whole time you were sitting on all this, letting us dig a hole so you could... I let you show me who you'd become, I said, and I did not raise my voice, because I have never once needed to. I gave you a home to live in and a fair set of rules, and I watched you break every one of them and then plan, in my own kitchen, to have me declared insane so you could sell a house that was never yours to sell, to cover a debt you were too ashamed to tell me about. I could have stopped you at the first moved chair. I didn't, because stopping the chair wouldn't have stopped you. You'd have found the next thing. I wanted it all in the light. Once. So here it is. You could have just talked to us, she whispered. I have talked to you for 18 months, Dana. Talking is what they count on. They'll let you talk forever, as long as you keep getting smaller, as long as you keep agreeing to move to the next room down. I held her eyes. The morning I stopped talking and started drafting is the morning I stopped getting smaller. Brett started to say something, and Renata, at the end of the table, spoke for the first time, mild as milk. "I'd think very carefully," she said, "about whether you want a retired estate attorney and a documented breach of a signed occupancy agreement involved in what you say next." He shut his mouth. And then my daughter broke. Not the performance of it, the real thing. Her voice cracked the way it did when she was small and the world stopped making sense. "I knew it was wrong," she said. "Every day. I let him move your chair and I said nothing. I hid Brett's mess and I let you think we were fine. And when he started talking about doctors, I told myself it was really about protecting you because that was easier than admitting what we'd become. I'm sorry, Mom. I don't even know how to be sorry enough." I let her cry. Sometimes that's the whole job of being a mother. You let them cry and you don't rush it and you don't fix it too fast. When she could speak again, she asked me the question they always ask. "How are you so calm?" "Because I never lost anything today, sweetheart," I said. "The house was always safe. Sam was always safe. The only thing that broke in this kitchen was a story you'd been telling yourself about me, and that story needed breaking. Being calm is the one weapon I've ever found that people who try to move you out of your own life cannot argue with." Then I told them what came next, because mercy and consequence can share a table, and I raised my daughter well enough, once, to know the difference between them. Here's how it goes. I'm not selling this house. I never was. I'm not going anywhere. You are. I said it plainly, no cruelty in it, because it didn't need any. You've breached the agreement you signed, and as the person with the legal right to say who lives under this roof, I'm giving you notice. You have 6 weeks. Not tonight. Not on the street. I'm not built that way. And Sam sleeps here some nights and I won't frighten him. 6 weeks to find a place and stand up in it. I'll cover your first month's rent and your deposit somewhere of your own, once as a beginning, not a bailout. I'll help you carry every box. The Keller debt is yours. I won't pay it, because the surest way to keep a drowning man drowning is to keep hauling him out of water he keeps jumping back into. And Sam's trust stays locked, which I suspect is the only part of tonight that will still matter to you in 10 years when you're glad it's there. Brett opened his mouth about the deposit, I think, which told me he still hadn't understood a word. And Dana, my daughter, for the first time in her marriage, put her hand over his and said, "Lo, Brett, don't, not one more word." And he closed his mouth and kept it closed. It had taken all of this to grow my daughter that particular spine, but there it was. Better late than never. Here's how it settled. In the months after, because I know some of you want the ledger and not just the feeling, and after 35 years in that office, I have always believed in a clean ledger. They left, on time, into a rental across town that was theirs and the right size for them. I stayed. Let me say that again for the ones in the comments who spend these stories shouting, "Don't sell, don't leave." I did not sell, and I did not leave. I hung Sal's photographs back down the hallway myself, and I carried his reading chair in from the garage, and I set it back by the window where it has sat for 20 years, and I sat in it in my house that is mine to live in until the day I die. They were the ones who packed. That is how it should have gone in every one of these stories, and this time it did. The Keller debt forced the reckoning I refused to buy them out of. With no house to refinance and no inheritance to borrow against, Dana and Brett faced the number the ordinary way, a payment plan, a second job for Brett, a great deal of swallowed pride. Hard, but theirs. People don't learn to swim while someone keeps lifting them out of the pool. Dana and I are not what we were, and I've made my peace with that. For a good while, she stayed angry, told a cousin or two that I'd humiliated her, that a mother shouldn't hold a signed page over her own child. She isn't entirely wrong that it was a hard thing, but hard and wrong are not the same, and she's slowly coming to know the difference. A few weeks ago, she asked me, in a small voice, to help her hang Sam's school pictures level in the new place. I said yes. We hung a whole hallway of them, and she didn't say one word about the flow of the room. It's a start. I've stopped waiting for a full apology because people are slow, not fixed. And the door of my house is not the same as the door of my trust. One I keep cracked for her, the other stays locked forever. Renata comes for coffee every Sunday now, in Sal's chair's twin on the other side of the window. Pearl calls twice a week and has finally forgiven me for not doing it her loud way. And Sam still learns things on his great-grandfather's hearth. And one day, years from now, a letter from Renata's firm will tell him that his grandmother and a bricklayer he barely remembers set aside a whole house and a whole future for him before he was old enough to ask, and locked it so tight the frightened people around him could never once reach it. He'll wonder why. Someone will tell him it's because we saw him clearly and loved him quietly and thought in decades the way Sal laid brick. People ask me sometimes if the trust, the evaluation, the folder on the table, all of it wasn't too much, too cold, too calculated for family. Couldn't I have just trusted them to do right? I trusted them to be exactly who they were. That's not coldness. That's the clearest kind of love I know, the kind that sees you plainly and builds the wall high enough anyway. I spent my whole life watching decent families destroy the ones who assumed the best and never locked a door. I decided 12 years ago, standing in a firm looking through glass at a woman named Ruth, that I would be the one who saw it coming. They mistook my patience for weakness. They mistook my quiet for consent. They mistook a woman who spent 35 years learning exactly how a house gets stolen for a woman who wouldn't notice hers being taken. That was the plan. It was always the plan. And it is the only revenge I have ever needed, not to ruin them, but to be, when the moment finally came, completely and calmly ready. Because family isn't who you're born to, family is who stays. It's who gets in the car at 40 minutes notice. It's who lays the brick that outlasts them for children they'll never meet. And it is, sometimes, a woman alone at her own kitchen table in a house no one can take from her, keeping one door cracked and the other one locked, which is the closest thing to wisdom I've got. If this found a quiet place in your heart, the kindest thing you can do is subscribe and stay a while. There's another story waiting for you. And tell me, would you have waited like I did? Or would you have thrown them out at the first moved chair? Have you ever been underestimated by the people who should have known you best? Write it below. I'll be reading. Until the next one, take care of yourself. You still matter, and your name is on more than you think.